Welcome back to Decode Healthcare with Harshal. In our last explainer, Part 23, we totally conquered the complexities of combination codes, while today we're transitioning to mastering the absolute rules of coding the permanent aftermath of an illness or injury. Our mission, completely decoding Section IB10 of the CMS official guidelines, which covers sequela, or what we often call late effects. We're going to learn exactly how to accurately code the long-term scars and permanent aftermath left behind by an old injury or illness that has already completely healed.
So, to get this right, we have to start with the precise official definition. Based strictly on Section IB10 of the CMS guidelines, a sequela is defined as the residual effect or the condition produced after the acute phase of an illness or injury has completely terminated. You can think of a sequela as the long-term scar left behind after the acute, active problem is 100% healed and gone. It's literally the lasting footprint of a past medical event.
Think of this like a split screen in your mind. Whenever you're looking at a patient's chart, you must always separate the current residual condition from the historical cause. On one side, you have the residual. That's what the patient is suffering from right now today. It's the whole reason they're seeking care. And on the other side, the cause. That's the historical event, the illness, or the trauma from the past that originally created this current issue. You absolutely have to isolate these two concepts to code them accurately.
Let's look at a classic clinical timeline to see how this builds in a real-world scenario. Let's say at point 1, year 0, a patient suffers an acute stroke. Now by point 2, maybe month 3, that acute stroke is completely resolved. The past acute phase is totally over. But fast forward to point 3, the present day, and the patient is still dealing with dysphagia, meaning difficulty swallowing. The stroke itself is entirely in the past, right? But the dysphagia remains as the current residual condition that needs treatment today.
And this timeline perfectly sets up the golden sequencing law of the CMS guidelines. When you're dealing with a sequela, it generally requires 2 codes, sequenced in a very specific order. Step 1, your primary code, is always the residual condition. That's the condition or nature of the sequela, like our patient's dysphagia. Step 2, your secondary code, is the sequela code itself, which represents the original cause, like the old healed stroke. So memorize this law. The residual condition takes the primary slot, and the old cause takes the secondary slot. Now, there are a couple of rare exceptions to our golden 2-code rule. Sometimes the codebook provides a combination code that perfectly merges both the residual and the cause into one single code. Other times, the alphabetic index might specifically direct you otherwise. But pay really close attention to this final critical rule straight from the guidelines. You can never, ever use the code for the acute phase of an illness or injury with the code for the late effect. You just can't code the acute illness alongside the late effect because clinically, they cannot exist at the exact same time.
The Chapter 19 Injury Trap and Mastering the 7th Character. Let's get into it.
This is where coders frequently fall into a major trap. When an acute injury leaves a residual mark, the original acute injury code is actually used, but it must be altered. We do this by using the mandatory 7th character S for sequelae. Adding that tiny letter S at the end of the code completely transforms its meaning. It essentially tells anyone reading the claim, hey, the original injury is completely healed, and we are strictly dealing with the aftermath right now.
So the crucial point here is to never use the A or D encounter characters if the current medical encounter is exclusively treating the chronic residual effect. Character A is for the initial encounter during active treatment, right? And D is for the subsequent encounter during the routine healing phase. If the active healing is totally over and A or D is instantly incorrect, the only right answer here is S.
This CMS guideline from Section IC19 is very specific, and it mandates exactly how we format this. It explicitly states, the S is added only to the injury code, not the sequela code. What this means in practice is that the specific type of sequela, like a scar, is sequenced first. Then, it's followed by the original injury code sporting that glowing letter S. The 7th character S simply identifies the old injury that's responsible for the current sequela.
All right, this brings us to a massive industry myth that trips up even veteran coders. It forces us to ask, is there an actual expiration date on a sequela? Like, does an old injury or illness eventually just expire from a coding perspective?
The CMS guidelines completely bust this myth. The truth is, there is no time limit whatsoever. The official text explicitly says there's no expiration on when a sequela code can be used. The residual effect might be apparent early on, like a cerebral infarction, or it could pop up months or even years later.
A sequela can literally be coded 5 weeks, 5 months, or 50 years after the initial event, provided the original event actually caused the current issue being treated.
Let's look at a few examples given directly in the CMS guidelines to see how this plays out in real scenarios. It could be a scar formation resulting from a burn. It could be a deviated septum treated in an adult, which was actually due to a childhood nasal fracture from decades ago. Or it could be infertility due to a tubal occlusion from an old case of tuberculosis. Whether it's a burn scar or a deviated septum from a 50-year-old childhood fracture, as long as you can clearly link the past event to the current problem in your documentation, the sequela rule totally applies.
So we've mastered coding the permanent aftermath of a resolved issue. But what happens when you have a medical disaster that was threatened, that almost happened, but ultimately didn't occur? What are the strict rules for coding an impending, massive crisis that was somehow magically avoided at the last minute?
Well, we'll decode that exact mystery in part 25 of this explainer series when we tackle section IB11, impending or threatened conditions. Make sure to subscribe, hit that like button, and share this explainer with your fellow coders so you don't miss out on those strict rules. But before you go, ask yourself this. If a patient's medical history is a complex story, are you accurately coding all the chapters or just the current page? Think about it, and I'll see you in part 25.